So one of my mods, shout out to MarcoFD, mentioned that my two-player career mode teammate, TMM Marduk, started running Jarno Opmeer's esports camera settings and was faster. So I thought, do you know what? I wonder if that's true. Let's do some tests and find out. So I'm going to show you in the background my best lap with the default camera settings while I explain to you the parameters of this test. So obviously I'm going to isolate all other variables. I'm using the same wheel, the same rig, the same car setup, everything. Did this on the same day. We're isolating as much as we possibly can to try and really see if the camera settings alone can really make you faster. Now, I've got my doubts about this. I feel like probably not, but obviously Jarno Opmeer, the reigning F1 esports champion, runs them for a reason. Now, he made a video, link to that in the description, on the camera settings. He showed all the settings that he runs, including he runs quite low graphic settings. Actually, he doesn't run low graphic settings anymore, but everything he does is purely for performance. Now, obviously, the game doesn't do everything purely for performance. Part of it's to make it look like real life. So, yeah. Let's just run his camera settings and see what's what. I'm going to be running the new Portimao circuit. I did about half an hour or so on each. As I said, the same setup, which is actually Lucas Blakely, the F1 esports driver, his setup, which is actually really, really nice. He's done a really good job on the setup, and I can actually drive it fairly well. Normally, the esports setup's too oversteery for me, but it actually feels really nice, so I should better get a good lap. As I said, half an hour on each. I will say I did the half an hour with the default camera settings first. Potentially a tiny different... a tiny little skewing of the results there, purely because the second half an hour is after a bit more practice. But actually, I felt fairly well practiced at this track, and you just see it did a 16.213, and I was quite happy with that lap. So let's jump in then and apply Jarno Opmeer's camera settings. Just before we get to the next part, I'm going to ask you to please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're enjoying this video, you'll probably enjoy my other videos. They're always detail-orientated, interesting F1 content. So do subscribe if you enjoy it. Let's get back to the video. So here we go then, this is the settings that he changes. Going into camera customization here, it does use TV pod as well. So first of all, it shortens the field of view. That will get rid of some things in your peripheral vision and really just kind of hone in on what's in front of you more than what's at the sides. Here then moves the camera forwards and upwards and then angles it down just so we can see the bottom of the wheel. Actually, I suspect he did it the other way around. I suspect he did angle down as much as possible so we can get the car as big as possible in his view, and then adjusted the forwards and the upwards action so we could just see the bottom of the wheel, as you can see at the bottom there. The last thing he does is gets rid of the camera shake and camera movement, which I think is going to be key to this, and I think that's going to be the biggest difference. I think the others are more sort of preference really, but I think the kind of lack of movement there is going to be the biggest difference. Let's have a look at them then back to back, as you can see here. So we've got the default camera settings and then the esports camera settings. So you can see definitely the car is a lot bigger in the view. You can now see the steering wheel. You couldn't before. The driver's head was kind of in the way. There's potentially some data on there that you might want. There's a few little bits that aren't on the OSD, but to be honest, that's pretty minor one that isn't really going to make a huge difference. But as I said, the car is a lot bigger in your view. I believe this is going to help us kind of control the car, so we can get a bit of a better feel for what the car's doing, rather than just being able to see, here we do lose a bit of field of view. We can't see the F1 branding on the right hand side there. We also can see a lot less of the sky. Obviously, none of that matters when you're driving the car. It's all about the car itself and being able to maneuver this vehicle as fast as possible. So quite big difference actually in terms of the look. Let's see if it makes a difference on track. Here we go then, on track for my very first lap with these new camera settings. Same setup, same everything else as before, but this is my very first lap. And I will say, straight away, it felt a little bit more attached to the car. I'll show us side by side a little bit later on, but you can see now there's very little movement in the camera. The camera is basically now bolted onto the car completely, so any movement is only the car. The camera now no longer moves at all. The field of view and the kind of angle of it did take a little bit of getting used to. It took me a couple of laps just to kind of adapt to the new angle, although that's quite a minor one. It was quite a quick adaptation really. But I tell you what, having driven this now obviously for half an hour when I'm recording this, I can tell you that the camera shake and the camera movement does make actually quite a big difference. And the key thing that I noticed was that it felt like the car was sliding less. Now obviously it wasn't, it's the same car, it's the same setup. The car is identical, but it felt like it was sliding less. Now I believe that's because when the camera is shaking and it moves forwards and backwards, it doesn't actually move to side or anything like that, but it moves forward and backwards when we hit the brakes. We'll see that a bit clearer later on in the side-by-side comparison. But purely because it's now so bolted to the car, there was no, I call it kind of faux slides, fake slides that weren't actually happening, but it felt like they were happening because of the camera. Now that causes me to either correct oversteer when I don't need to, Or it causes me just to lose a little bit of confidence and just feel like I'm going to slide when I'm actually not going to slide, and be a little bit more cautious. Now, this made me realise I've been running some esports setups in the two-player careers, and whenever I need a setup, I just get a top time trial setup, and sometimes I make it a bit more stable. But I've been running those setups, but I've not been running the esports camera setup. And actually, that's quite a key part of the puzzle, because esports setups are quite slidey. They like to have a lot of rotation in the car to really get it through the corner without needing to use the higher wings. And often I do struggle with that. I struggle with oversteer. But what I'm realising now is that maybe I wasn't struggling with oversteer. I mean, Lucas's setup here is quite stable anyway. But maybe, actually, a lot of it was just the camera. The camera is obviously not designed to use an esports setup. And an esports setup is not designed to use the default camera. So they're a little bit incompatible. It's all quite minor, but that is what I see. That is what I noticed. There's a couple of mistakes on this lap as I do adapt to it. But that was the key thing I noticed. That actually, you know, if you're going to run an esports setup, you also need to run their camera settings. It seems obvious to me now, but it's something I never considered before. And as I said, I definitely felt less sliding. It felt like the car was more planted, and it actually gave me more confidence. It sounds insane. All it was camera movement, but you know, there is a couple of mistakes on this lap, as I said. You know, it does take a while to kind of get used to it, but that was the difference I felt. Let's now do a side-by-side view so we can directly see the difference between the camera movement, which I think is the biggest difference. Here we go then. This is a side-by-side comparison of my best default camera setting lap versus my best esports camera setting lap. The default camera is on the left and the esports camera is on the right. Now, mainly look out during this lap for the difference in the camera movement. So you can see left hand side down the straight, the camera's constantly moving about. The right hand side one still does move a little bit because the car itself is obviously hitting bumps all over the place with this new laser scan track. But on the left hand side, you can see there's actually quite a lot of jittering around, which in your mind just creates a bit more vagueness as to exactly what's going on in the car, because it's moving when the car isn't actually moving. That's your camera moving, not the car. Also, look out for the camera movement as we hit the brakes here. Look at the Ineos logo. You can see how much it moves. It's actually quite a lot of movement on the brakes. Again, the only movement is lateral, which I think is front to back, rather than horizontal left to right. So, you know, in the corners, it's not making a massive difference, but obviously, depending on whether you're accelerating or decelerating in the corners, there will still be that slight movement. And again, in your head, it just creates a little bit more vagueness, so you're not 100% what's happening with the car. Whereas on the right hand side, the camera is bolted firmly to the car. The only movements that you see with your eyes are actually happening with the car. They're not vagueness with the camera. So I am a little bit faster. As you can see, I am a little bit up. It is quite a minor difference, but I wasn't expecting to be a second lap because the lap on the left was a good one anyway. But I am faster, interestingly, with the esports camera settings. So as we cross the line here, we're going to see that there's around about 1/10 of a second difference or so. But more to the point for me, is not just the raw lap time difference, it's the consistency difference. Now look at here at my top 5 laps from the session. Now the top one, there was a lot more disallowed laps. As you can see, there's actually only 3 valid laps that I did within that half an hour, because it is difficult to keep this car on track on this circuit. But you can see that at the bottom there with the esports camera settings, I did 4 laps that were faster than my best lap in half an hour with default camera settings. That's insane. And even the 5th lap was only 3,000 slower. That consistency, I did 5 laps within 1/10 of a second. Now, I'm not an esports driver. I'm not that consistent compared to those guys. So that is phenomenal. Whereas on the top, like I said, I only did 3 laps that were legal. And I did do 2 laps that were pretty close to my best lap. They were illegal laps, but they were pretty close to it. But none of them were obviously quicker than what I managed to do with the esports camera settings. So I think, yes, it does make you a little bit faster in terms of raw pace, in terms of pure capability to do the lap time, but also I think it makes you quite a lot more consistent. Again, just because the camera is completely bolted to the car, so there's no vagueness in your mind, you know exactly what's going on. Also, that kind of faux sliding, the fake sliding that seems that you think is happening because the camera moving about, but actually the car is not sliding, you don't need to correct it. So I have more confidence with esports camera settings, and actually I am going to run them from here on out because I don't think it makes a difference really to you guys, to the content that I make, but I do think it makes a difference. I think it makes me better, I think it makes me faster. So there we go, guys. The answer to the question is yes. In my opinion, esports camera settings are better. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, guys, and I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.